September 14, 2017, the body of Claire Moreau, 29, was discovered in the ancient wine cellar of Château Lumière, historic estate on the outskirts of Lyon, France. The investigative journalist had been strangled, her body positioned between century-old wine barrels, a notebook still clutched in her rigid hand. Within hours of the discovery, local authorities began investigating her recent work, a series of articles probing suspicious property developments throughout the region. As detectives delved deeper, they uncovered a chilling connection to Victor Dupont, 56, one of Lyon's most prominent real estate moguls. What had begun as research into zoning irregularities had led Claire to the center of an elaborate criminal network, a discovery that would ultimately cost her life. The morning fog hung heavy over Lyon that September day, wrapping the city's terracotta rooftops and Renaissance architecture in a gauzy shroud. Château Lumière, named for the unusual way sunlight played through its hand-cut crystal windows, had stood for over 3 centuries, surviving revolutions and world wars, only to become the stage for a thoroughly modern crime. The chateau had recently been converted into a luxury hotel and event space by Groupe Dupont Development, the real estate empire built by Victor Dupont, a man whose name adorned half the construction sites in Lyon. Château Lumière's wine cellar remained largely unchanged since its construction in 1682. Stone arches supported the low ceiling, and the constant temperature of 13 degrees Celsius created the perfect environment for aging wine, and for preserving evidence. Claire's body was found by Marcel Benoit, the chateau's sommelier, when he descended at 7:15 a.m. to retrieve a specific vintage for a breakfast event. His screams echoed through the ancient stone corridors, carrying up the spiral staircase to the main floor, where early rising guests were just beginning to gather for coffee. She was just lying there, between the Bordeaux and Burgundy sections, Benoit later told police, his hands trembling as he accepted a glass of water. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing. I thought at first she had fallen, hit her head perhaps, but then I saw the marks on her neck. The sommelier hadn't touched the body, an unusual restraint that investigators would later appreciate. Instead, he had backed away slowly, fumbling for his phone to call the emergency number, his polished leather shoes slipping on the cellar's damp stone floor. Claire Moreau had been making waves in Lyon's journalistic circles with her unflinching coverage of municipal corruption for _Le Progrès _, the city's respected daily newspaper. Her series, Foundations of Deception, had already led to the resignation of 2 city councillors and was rumored to be under consideration for a prestigious investigative journalism award. The most recent installment, published just 3 days before her death, had hinted at revelations regarding a prominent business figure whose empire was built on quicksand. In retrospect, the foreshadowing seemed almost too obvious. As police cordoned off the chateau grounds, turning away confused hotel guests and canceling a wine-tasting event scheduled for that evening, Victor Dupont was giving a keynote address at a real estate development conference in Marseille, 2 hours away by high-speed train. When informed of the murder by telephone, his response was recorded as, appropriately shocked. He immediately offered the full cooperation of his staff and announced he would return to Lyon that afternoon to assist authorities in any way possible. A tragedy, he told reporters gathered outside the conference center. Ms. Moreau was a talented journalist. Lyon has lost a courageous voice for truth. Detective Chief Inspector Matthew Laurent arrived at Château Lumière at 8:42 a.m., the collar of his raincoat turned up against the persistent drizzle that had replaced the morning fog. At 53, Laurent had investigated homicides across the Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes region for over 20 years. The first 48 hours are critical, he reminded his team as they assembled in the chateau's grand entrance hall. Every person who entered or exited this building in the past 3 days needs to be identified and interviewed. Every security camera, every electronic keycard log, every staff observation. The crime scene team worked methodically in the cellar, photographing Claire's body from multiple angles before the medical examiner made his preliminary assessment. Death by strangulation, likely between midnight and 2 a.m., Dr. Rousseau determined, pointing to the distinctive bruising pattern on Claire's neck. Significant force was applied, suggesting a killer with considerable upper body strength. No signs of sexual assault. The killer was focused solely on ending her life. Claire's possessions yielded the first substantial clues. Her smartphone was missing, but her laptop was found in her guest room on the chateau's third floor, password protected but undamaged. Her notebook, still clutched in her hand, contained handwritten notes from interviews, including several pages with comments about DG Holdings, an entity that investigators would later discover was a shell company connected to DuPont's business interests. Most telling was a scribbled entry on the final page, "Meet JL at cellar, 11:30 p.m. Confirms money trail." Security footage from the chateau revealed Claire entering the building at 4:17 p.m. the previous day, checking in for what was scheduled to be a two-night stay. She had spent the evening in the hotel restaurant, dining alone while reviewing documents, occasionally making notes. The cameras showed her returning to her room at 10:42 p.m., then re-emerging at 11:27 p.m., making her way toward the cellar. No cameras covered the cellar entrance itself, an oversight that management explained was due to the historic preservation restrictions on modifying the building's original structure. Who is JL? Became the investigation's first pressing question. Hotel records showed no guest with those initials staying at the chateau on the night in question. Staff interviews yielded a possible answer when a bartender recalled Claire speaking briefly with Jacques Lemaire, the chateau's accountant, earlier in the evening. Nothing unusual about their interaction, the bartender reported. They spoke for perhaps 2 minutes near the fireplace. "I noticed because Monsieur Lemaire rarely speaks with guests." When detectives tried to locate Jacques Lemaire for questioning, they discovered he had not reported for work that morning. A visit to his apartment in Lyon's 6th arrondissement found it empty, with signs of hasty packing. His neighbor mentioned seeing him leave around 6 a.m. with a suitcase, appearing nervous, checking over his shoulder constantly. An alert was issued for Lemaire's detention and questioning. A breakthrough came when the digital forensics team gained access to Claire's laptop. Her research files revealed months of investigation into property transactions across Lyon, with particular focus on several developments by Groupe DuPont. She had compiled evidence suggesting a pattern of bribery, money laundering, and tax evasion. One document, titled "Château Acquisition, Red Flags," detailed how the historic Château Lumière had been purchased for significantly below market value after zoning officials mysteriously reversed a preservation order that had previously prevented commercial development of the property. Most damning was a series of emails between Claire and a confidential source who signed messages only as "Insider." Their correspondence indicated that Insider had access to financial records proving Victor DuPont had been channeling funds through offshore accounts to bribe city officials and intimidate competing developers. The final email, received just hours before Claire's death, read, "Documents ready. Wine cellar meeting confirmed. This will expose everything. Be careful, VD suspects leaks." Victor DuPont returned from Marseille at 3:45 p.m., arriving at police headquarters in a chauffeur-driven Mercedes. Impeccably dressed in a tailored gray suit, he expressed appropriate concern over the murder while maintaining a careful distance from the event itself. Ms. Moreau was at the chateau researching an article about historic buildings being repurposed for tourism, he explained smoothly. "We encourage journalists to cover our restoration work. Château Lumière is the crown jewel of our heritage preservation portfolio." When asked about his whereabouts the previous night, DuPont provided a detailed alibi: dinner with conference organizers in Marseille until 11 p.m., followed by drinks in his hotel bar with several colleagues until after 1 a.m. Multiple witnesses could confirm his presence, he assured detectives. As for Jacques Lemaire, DuPont expressed surprise at his disappearance. "A valued employee for over 5 years. Absolutely trustworthy. I cannot imagine him involved in anything untoward." But as DuPont left the interview room, Detective Laurent noticed something the real estate mogul had overlooked: a small wine stain on his French cuff, barely visible against the white fabric. The detective made a note to request the clothes DuPont had worn the previous evening as potential evidence. Claire Moreau had not set out to bring down one of Lyon's most powerful businessmen. Her investigation had begun 6 months earlier with a tip about irregular building permits in the historic Croix-Rousse district. The daughter of a construction worker and a librarian, Claire had developed a keen interest in both architecture and social justice, making real estate development the perfect intersection of her passions. After graduating with honors from Sciences Po Paris, she had turned down more lucrative opportunities to return to her hometown of Lyon, joining the investigative team at _Le Progrès_. Claire had this remarkable ability to follow paper trails that others couldn't see, recalled her editor, Philippe Mercier. Where most journalists might give up after hitting bureaucratic walls, she would find another angle, another document, another source. She was relentless, but never reckless, until perhaps the end. Victor Dupont had built his empire from more humble beginnings than his polished image suggested. The son of a small-time property manager from Lyon's working-class 8th arrondissement, he had leveraged family connections and a ruthless business instinct to transform his father's modest company into a development juggernaut. By the early 2000s, Groupe Dupont was responsible for reshaping entire neighborhoods, specializing in acquiring distressed historic properties and converting them into luxury hotels and apartments. Victor understood something fundamental about Lyon, explained a former business partner who requested anonymity. This city worships its history but craves modernity. He promised to deliver both, preserving facades while gutting interiors to create contemporary spaces for the elite. The preservation boards got the appearance of conservation, the wealthy got their luxury accommodations, and Victor got very, very rich. Claire and Victor had first crossed paths at a city council meeting in March 2017, where Dupont was presenting plans for redeveloping an abandoned silk factory. Claire had questioned the hasty approval process, noting that environmental impact studies typically took months longer. Dupont had dismissed her concerns with practiced charm, inviting her to tour the property personally. "I believe in transparency, Mademoiselle Moreau," he had said, handing her his business card. "My projects benefit all of Lyon. I have nothing to hide." That invitation had sparked Claire's curiosity. After touring the factory, she began noticing patterns across Dupont's developments. The same zoning officials always approved his permits, environmental concerns were routinely overridden, and competing developers frequently withdrew bids citing unforeseen circumstances. Small inconsistencies in public records led her to deeper research, eventually connecting Dupont to a network of shell companies used to obscure property ownership and financial transactions. By July 2017, Claire had identified Jacques Lemaire as a potential source. As Château Lumière's accountant with access to internal financial records, Lemaire had initially rebuffed her inquiries. But something changed in early September. He had contacted her unexpectedly, suggesting a meeting at a quiet café in Vieux Lyon. "I can't be part of this anymore," he had told her, nervously glancing toward the door throughout their conversation. "Dupont is not who people think he is. There are threats, bribes, even violence behind the facade." What Claire didn't know was that her investigation had attracted Dupont's attention months earlier. His network of influence included contacts within local government who had alerted him to Claire's unusually detailed public records requests. Dupont had initially dismissed her as a nuisance. Ambitious journalists regularly scrutinized his business, but none had penetrated the complex layers of financial obfuscation he had built over decades. Victor didn't become truly concerned until early September, testified his personal assistant during later proceedings. He received a call that visibly upset him. Afterward, he ordered a complete audit of all sensitive documents and instructed IT to check for security breaches. He began working late hours in his private office, refusing interruptions. That call had come from a bank official in Geneva, warning Dupont that someone had been asking questions about certain accounts connected to DG Holdings. Around the same time, Dupont discovered that Lemaire had accessed financial records beyond his normal responsibilities. Surveillance of Lemaire's activities led to the discovery of his meeting with Claire, confirming Dupont's fears of an internal leak. For Victor Dupont, the threat wasn't merely legal, it was existential. Beyond the visible success of Groupe DuPont lay a complex criminal enterprise. His development served as sophisticated money laundering operations for several European criminal networks. Through a series of holding companies, DuPont converted illicit cash into legitimate real estate assets, taking a substantial percentage while providing crime syndicates with clean investment portfolios. The renovation of Château Lumière represented DuPont's most ambitious laundering project to date. The €47 million reported renovation cost actually concealed nearly €30 million in laundered funds. If Claire published her findings, the resulting investigation would unravel not only DuPont's business but expose his connections to organized crime figures who would not look kindly on such exposure. It became a simple calculation for DuPont, a prosecutor would later explain. Silence the journalist and eliminate the internal leak, or face complete destruction. Given his character and history, his choice was predictable. Claire had no idea that her final days of investigation had triggered such alarm. As she compiled her evidence and prepared to meet with Lumière at the chateau, she believed she was simply completing a thorough exposé on corruption in real estate development. The documents Lumière had promised would provide the final proof needed for her most significant story yet. She had informed her editor to expect a major piece within days, potentially requiring legal review before publication. She was excited but not fearful, her editor recalled. Claire mentioned facing some resistance from sources but nothing that suggested she felt her life was in danger. Had I known what she had truly uncovered, I would have insisted on greater precautions. September 13, 2017, 8:15 a.m. Claire Moreau sat at her small desk in the open-plan office of _Le Progrès_, reviewing a message from Jacques Lumière confirming their meeting that night. I have everything, account statements, transfer authorizations, the offshore structure documents. The chateau cellar at 11:30 p.m. Come alone. Use your press credentials to book a room so your presence doesn't raise questions. She confirmed her reservation at Château Lumière, requesting a room with a view of the gardens. 10:30 a.m. At Groupe DuPont headquarters, Victor DuPont prepared for his trip to Marseille, a convenient alibi planned weeks in advance. Cancel my return ticket, he instructed his assistant. I'll drive back instead. The conference ends at 6, but I'll tell everyone I'm staying overnight. Make dinner reservations for 8 people at Le Puisette for 8 p.m., but call back an hour before to cancel due to my sudden migraine. His assistant, accustomed to his sometimes unusual requests, nodded without question. Your overnight bag is packed. The speech notes are in your briefcase. Will you need anything else for Marseille? Have Weber bring the car around at noon, DuPont replied, referring to his longtime driver and occasional enforcer. And confirm that the security upgrades at the chateau have been delayed. I don't want any new cameras installed until Friday. 2:45 p.m. Claire packed her laptop, recorder, and notebooks into her messenger bag. She hesitated, then added a small canister of pepper spray, a gift from her father when she began investigative work. She rarely carried it, but something about this story had begun to feel different. Before leaving, she encrypted a folder of documents and emailed it to herself with instructions that it be opened only if she didn't check in by noon the following day. 3:30 p.m. Victor DuPont's TGV departed Lyon Part-Dieu station bound for Marseille. He was observed by multiple passengers and the train staff, establishing his presence exactly as planned. In the business class carriage, he reviewed his presentation and made several calls, ensuring witnesses would remember his activities. Meanwhile, a black Mercedes identical to his official car left the company garage, driven by Weber on a route carefully avoiding traffic cameras. 4:17 p.m. Claire arrived at Château Lumière, passing through the ornate wrought iron gates and approaching the 17th-century limestone facade with its perfectly symmetrical windows. At the reception desk, a young woman in a tailored uniform checked her in efficiently. We've given you room 304, Mademoiselle Moreau. It has an excellent view of the Rose Garden. Will you be dining with us this evening? Claire confirmed she would, requesting a table for one at 8 p.m. As she followed the porter to her room, she didn't notice Jacques Lemaire watching nervously from the administrative office doorway, nor the chateau's security chief speaking quietly into his phone. 6:30 p.m. Dupont delivered his keynote address at the Marseille Real Estate Conference, a polished presentation on preserving heritage through thoughtful development. Attendees later described him as completely at ease and engaging with the audience. After receiving a standing ovation, he joined conference organizers and key developers for dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Old Port, where staff would confirm his presence until approximately 11 p.m. 8:12 p.m. Claire dined alone in the chateau's restaurant, reviewing her notes and occasionally glancing around the elegant space with its crystal chandeliers and silk-covered walls. At a corner table, she spotted Lemaire dining with another staff member. They exchanged brief nods, nothing that would arouse suspicion. After finishing her meal, Claire approached the bar and ordered a cognac, positioning herself near the fireplace where Lemaire passed by moments later. "Everything is still arranged?" she asked quietly. 11:30, the cellar door will be unlocked. "I'll bring the documents," Lemaire replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Be careful about the security chief, he reports directly to Dupont." 10:03 p.m. A black Mercedes entered Lyon via the A7 motorway, avoiding the main toll plaza by taking a less traveled route. Inside, Weber drove while Victor Dupont sat silently in the back seat, scrolling through his phone. "No cameras in the wine cellar entrance," Weber confirmed. "And I've ensured the night security guard will be occupied with an alarm test on the opposite side of the grounds at 11:30. "Good," Dupont replied, his voice betraying no emotion. "Park in the service area. I'll use the staff entrance. 2 hours maximum, then we're back on the road to Marseille." 10:42 p.m. Claire returned to her room, changing from her dinner attire into darker clothing, a black turtleneck sweater and jeans. She placed her recorder, phone, and notebook in her pockets and checked the time. Almost an hour before the meeting. She used the time to organize her questions, unaware that her movements were being tracked by the chateau's security system, information flowing directly to Dupont's phone. 11:15 p.m. Jacques Lemaire entered the wine cellar through the service corridor, carrying a leather portfolio containing documents detailing Dupont's financial crimes. His hands trembled slightly as he checked his watch. Before meeting Claire, he needed to retrieve additional evidence he had hidden behind a loose stone in the cellar's oldest section, proof of his own coerced involvement that he hoped would mitigate his legal exposure. As he moved between the ancient barrels, a shadow detached itself from the darkness. "Jacques," Dupont's voice was soft, almost regretful. "Did you really think I wouldn't discover your betrayal?" Lemaire froze, the portfolio clutched against his chest. "Victor. After everything I've done for you," Dupont continued, stepping closer. "Your gambling debts paid, your wife's medical treatments arranged. And this is how you repay me." "You've gone too far," Lemaire whispered, backing away. The money laundering was one thing, but the threats against competing developers, the bribes. "I never agreed to be part of this level of criminality." "Yet you've benefited nicely," Dupont replied, his tone hardening. "Your signature is on enough documents to ensure you'd never see daylight again. Did your journalist friend promise to protect you?" 11:27 p.m. Claire left her room, taking the grand staircase down to the main floor. The chateau was quiet, most guests having retired for the evening. A single staff member nodded politely as she passed through the lobby. Following Lemaire's instructions, she located the narrow stone staircase leading to the cellar, its entrance partially concealed behind a decorative tapestry. The heavy wooden door was unlocked as promised. As she descended, the temperature dropped noticeably. The stone steps, worn smooth by centuries of use, curved downward into increasing darkness. At the bottom, vintage lighting cast weak, amber pools that barely illuminated the rows of bottles and barrels stretching into the shadows. "Jacques," she called softly, her voice absorbed by the dense stone walls. 11:35 p.m. Victor Dupont watched from behind a stone pillar as Claire moved deeper into the cellar, calling quietly for Lemaire. His associate Weber had already removed Lemaire's unconscious form through the service entrance, bound for a location where the accountant's cooperation could be ensured more permanently. Now Dupont needed to handle the journalist, preferably in a way that would send a message to others who might consider investigating his affairs. "He won't be joining us, Ms. Moreau," Dupont said, stepping into the dim light. Claire spun around, instinctively reaching for the pepper spray in her pocket. "Mr. Dupont? What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in Marseille. And you're supposed to be writing about architectural preservation, not money laundering," he replied, his tone conversational as he moved closer. "I admire your persistence, truly. You've uncovered more than any other journalist. Unfortunately, that makes you a significant problem." Claire's hand closed around the pepper spray. "Whatever you're thinking, it's too late. I've already secured copies of the evidence. Anything happens to me, it all goes public." "A standard precaution, and easily managed," Dupont said, now close enough that Claire could smell his expensive cologne. "Your editor will receive some convincing evidence of your decision to abandon journalism after receiving a compelling job offer abroad. Technology makes disappearances much simpler these days." 11:42 p.m. Claire attempted to step backward, calculating the distance to the stairs. "People know I'm here. Hotel records, restaurant staff. All explaining why your body will unfortunately be discovered here tomorrow," Dupont interrupted. "A tragic accident while exploring the historic cellar after hours. These old stones can be treacherously slippery." Claire pulled the pepper spray from her pocket and aimed it at Dupont's face, but he was prepared for this possibility. With remarkable speed for his age, he grabbed her wrist, twisting until she cried out in pain and the canister clattered to the floor. His other hand clamped over her mouth, stifling her scream. "I built everything I have from nothing," he hissed, forcing her backward against the wall. "No privileged education, no family connections. Just intelligence and willingness to do whatever necessary. I won't allow some self-righteous journalist to destroy it all." 11:58 p.m. Claire fought with unexpected strength, managing to bite the hand covering her mouth hard enough to draw blood. Dupont jerked back, momentarily surprised, giving Claire the chance to break free. She ran between the wine racks, knocking bottles to the floor as she went, the shattering glass and splashing wine creating momentary distractions. In the darkness, she pulled out her phone, desperately trying to call for help, but the thick stone walls blocked the signal. As she rounded a corner into a small alcove used for wine tastings, she found herself trapped, no exit except the way she had come. Dupont appeared in the entrance, breathing heavily, his customary composure gone. "You've made this much harder than it needed to be," he said, grabbing a corkscrew from the tasting table. Claire threw her phone at his face, causing a momentary distraction as she tried to push past him. In the struggle that followed, Dupont's hands found her throat, his manicured fingers digging into her skin with surprising strength. 12:17 a.m., September 14th. Victor Dupont stood over Claire's body, adjusting his cuffs and regaining his composure. He retrieved her phone from where it had fallen and pocketed it, along with the pepper spray. Her notebook remained clutched in her hand, attempting to remove it might disturb the scene he was carefully arranging to suggest an accidental fall. Using a handkerchief, he wiped any surfaces he had touched and cleaned the drops of his blood from where she had bitten him. Before leaving, he surveyed the scene with a professional eye. Wine bottles lay broken across the floor, consistent with someone stumbling in the dark. Claire's body rested at an angle that suggested she had fallen and hit her head, though the medical examiner would eventually determine strangulation as the cause of death. Satisfied with his work, Dupont exited through the service corridor, where Weber waited with the car. "Lemaire?" Dupont asked as he slid into the back seat. "Taken care of," Weber replied simply. He'll be in Zurich by morning with sufficient motivation to stay quiet. Dupont checked his watch. We can be back in Marseille by 3 a.m. I'll appear at breakfast, looking tired but present. No one will question my presence at the conference. As the Mercedes pulled away from Château Lumière, neither man noticed the small security camera partially hidden in the ivy beside the service entrance, a new installation that had not been on the security plans Dupont had reviewed, capturing clear images of their departure. The arrest of Victor Dupont occurred 3 days after Claire Moreau's murder, executed with the precision that Detective Laurent insisted upon. Rather than a public spectacle, plainclothes officers intercepted Dupont as he left his office, quietly escorting him to a waiting vehicle while a search team simultaneously entered his residence and office. The evidence against him had accumulated rapidly once investigators knew where to look. The security camera overlooking the service entrance, installed just 2 days before the murder during an unscheduled security upgrade, provided critical footage of Dupont at the chateau when he was allegedly in Marseille. Forensics recovered his blood from beneath Claire's fingernails where she had bitten him, while cellular tower data showed his personal phone moving from Marseille back to Lyon during hours when witnesses placed him at his hotel. Most damning was the testimony of Jacques Lemaire, located in a Zurich hotel with a broken arm and facial contusions. Facing extradition on financial crimes, he offered complete cooperation, providing detailed accounts of Dupont's criminal operations and the events leading to Claire's murder. I never believed he would kill her, Lemaire testified. Threaten her, perhaps intimidate her into silence. But murder? Even knowing Victor's capacity for cruelty, I underestimated how far he would go to protect himself. The trial became a sensation across France, exposing a network of corruption that extended far beyond real estate development. Prosecutors presented evidence of over 120 million euros laundered through Dupont's projects, connections to organized crime in 3 countries, and systematic bribery of officials throughout the Rhône-Alpes region. 6 local politicians and 3 banking executives were indicted as co-conspirators, their careers and reputations destroyed. Claire's editor ensured her final investigation was published as a special edition of _Le Progrès_, completed by her colleagues using her notes and Lemaire's evidence. The exposé, titled The House That Crime Built, Victor Dupont's Empire of Corruption, won posthumous awards and prompted nationwide reforms in development oversight and financial transparency for real estate projects. The court proceedings revealed psychological dimensions of Dupont that shocked even those who had known him for decades. Psychiatric evaluation diagnosed narcissistic personality disorder with sociopathic tendencies, noting his complete lack of remorse and his perception of Claire as an object, threatening his status rather than a human being. Dupont exhibits the classic characteristics of successful psychopaths in business, the court psychiatrist testified. Superficial charm, grandiose self-worth, pathological lying, and a complete absence of empathy or guilt. In his own testimony, Dupont remained defiant, portraying himself as a visionary businessman persecuted for his success. I transformed abandoned buildings into architectural treasures, he declared from the witness stand. I created thousands of jobs and millions in tax revenue. Yes, some regulations were circumvented, some officials were compensated for their cooperation, this is the reality of development in France. But I never authorized violence. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all charges, including first-degree murder. The judge, delivering a scathing assessment of Dupont's actions, sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum of 30 years before parole consideration, effectively a death sentence for the then 57-year-old defendant. You took the life of a young woman whose only crime was seeking truth, the judge stated during sentencing. In doing so, you not only ended Claire Moreau's promising future but betrayed the city of Lyon and the principles of law that allow society to function. Your developments may remain standing, but your legacy is one of corruption and cruelty. Château Lumière itself became an ironic footnote to the case. Seized by authorities as an asset obtained through criminal activity, the historic property was eventually purchased by a non-profit foundation established in Claire's memory. Today, it houses the Claire Moreau Center for Investigative Journalism, where young reporters receive training and support for work exposing corruption and financial crimes. Each year on the anniversary of her death, journalists gather in the château's cellar, now transformed into an archive of Claire's work and a memorial to her sacrifice. Among the weathered stone walls that once witnessed her final moments, a new generation of investigators pledges to continue her pursuit of truth, regardless of the powerful interests it may threaten. As for Victor Dupont, reports from Clairvaux prison describe a man isolated and diminished, his empire dismantled, his name synonymous with corruption. His final appeal was rejected by the European Court of Human Rights in 2022, ending his legal options and ensuring that, like the ancient chateau where he committed his crime, he would remain contained within stone walls, not as a testament to prestige and power, but as a warning about the ultimate cost of unchecked ambition and the enduring consequence of truth revealed.